Fine. What is the camera? What is the camera? Et la vidéo caméra. Allez.
Abaraka Jalisefu. Good morning, our distinguished panelists, who I will not name now, but will name in a few minutes. But I want to salute your presence and your acceptance to serve in this very important forum. I also wish to welcome to the Jama Hall of the Kairaba Beach Hotel this morning all of our distinguished brothers and sisters who have traveled great distances to be here with us. Those from Canada, those from Kingston, Jamaica, from the United States of America, from the United Kingdom, and beyond. Your presence in the smiling coast of Africa is highly welcomed and is indeed a great source of inspiration and encouragement in the true spirit of Pan-Africanism. For the past 4 days, since your arrival here, you've been listening to songs and watching dances and have heard a few statements at the official opening ceremony. During the official opening, Dr. Julius Garvey did rightly allude to the fact that the International Roots Festival is not just a celebration for celebration's sake, but rather it is a vehicle that the government of the Gambia uses, or it is a platform that the government of the Gambia has instituted so as to build bridges between Africans on the continent, the Gambia in particular, and those in the diaspora for meaningful cooperation and development. Like I said at the opening, African peoples all over the world, wherever they may find themselves today, continue to see Africa, and rightly so, as being their land, as being where they belong. As Brother Malcolm used to say, it is a question of land. We should be able to identify the land where we come from and where we belong. And indeed, this is the spirit of Pan-Africanism. And this is why, even at the level of the African Union, the diaspora is recognized as being an appendage to the countries that constitute the African Union. It's been a lot of very scintillating dances and indeed very good performances that you have seen and recorded. Today, this morning, we want to think and reflect on some very salient and important aspects of our lives as Africans. Hence, the organization of this symposium with the theme African Culture in the 21st Century, Prospects and Challenges. African culture in the 21st century, prospects and challenges. And when I reflect on the topic, I ask myself the question, are there problematics with the topic? Is there an African culture, or are there African cultures? What is the definition of an African culture? Or what are the definitions of African cultures? Are the two the same? Are they interchangeable? We talk of an African culture. We talk of African cultures in view of the diversity of the peoples of Africa and the diversity of those cultures, even though we cannot dispute the commonalities that run across the broad spectrum of African cultures. So, our distinguished and eminent panelists will try to wade their way through this complex subject. And of course, you, the distinguished audience, will also have opportunity also to make contribution or to ask questions, so that by the time we finish this forum, perhaps we would have left this hall having a better insight as to really which way African culture, with African culture, in the face of the onslaught of foreign influences, recognizing the fact that no culture is an island of its own. Culture is not static, it is dynamic. But why is there a need to preserve our culture? Those intrinsic elements in our culture that account for our cultural identity as a people and as a continent. These the distinguished panelists will try to explore. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, in 1975, at a meeting in Mexico in the Intergovernmental Conference on Cultural Policies, defined culture as thus, and I quote, "Culture is the set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of society or a social group, and that it encompasses, in addition to art and literature, lifestyles, ways of living together, value systems, traditions, and beliefs." This is the Intergovernmental Committee on Cultural Policies that tried to define culture in Mexico City in 1975. So we will look at the topic this morning, African culture in the 21st century, prospects and challenges, bearing in mind that culture is in two realms, both the tangible and the intangible. And when we look at Africa, some social scientists like to say that it is a continent that has the triple heritage. There is the Euro-Christian influence, the Arabo-Islamic influence, as well as the indigenous African culture. So there is a mix of all of these. But the question is, what are those intrinsic elements that continue to account for our cultural identity as a people and as a continent. This morning we have distinguished and eminent sons of the soil. One is Gambian, but spends most of his time in the United States of America, and maybe I should start with him. Brother Lamin Sarr, commonly known as Lamin, is of Gambian nationality who currently lives and works in the United States of America. He received his education and training from Keystone College, Brown University, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and the School of Marine Studies in the College of Fisheries and Marine Sciences at the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington. He holds degrees in political science and general studies, international relations, and in marine affairs, including advanced academic training in law of the sea with a focus on marine policy and ocean management. Lamin's professional and work experience is extensive in both scope and dimension. He has worked and traveled throughout Africa, Europe, and North Africa. He is currently the managing partner in charge of international projects for the Indigo DNA Corporation, representing client companies and institutions worldwide in helping resolve their global transactional challenges. However, Lamin's real passion is in the project concept he has developed over the past 16 years, called the Middle Passage Reversal Project, which has been spawned into the twin elements of the Heritage Revival Projects and the Afro Pilgrimage Travel and Tours Corporation. Under the single iconic logo of the Middle Passage Reversal Project, completing the cycle of freedom, these two complementary constitute the core of what we call the four Ps paradigm for a public-private and philanthropic partnership to rejuvenate our broken African family through understanding, appreciation of our shared heritage, and engaging our collective capacities for the transformation of our peoples. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Brother Lamin Sarr on the panel. Dr. Ronoko Rashidi. Dr. Rashidi was born in 1954. He is a historian, essayist, author, and public lecturer based in Los Angeles, California. He authored Introduction to the Study of African Classical Civilizations in 1993 and is editor of Unchained African Voices, a collection of poetry and prose by death row prison inmates. Dr. Rashidi's work focuses on his views concerning African foundations of world civilization. Several scholars dispute his assertion of genetic ties between ancient African populations and indigenous and black populations in the modern world. He is an undisputed proponent of Pan-Africanism in the hallowed League of Molefe, field research and educational group tours to India, Aboriginal Australia, the Fiji Islands, and Southeast Asia, Egypt, and Brazil. He is a frequently featured writer and speaker and lectures on topics including ancient Egypt, his belief in the African presence in. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Julius Garvey, son to the late Marcus Mosiah Garvey. As a young student in the United States then, I followed very keenly the works of Marcus Mosiah Garvey and knew at a very early age that he was one that actually established the Universal Negro Improvement Association in New York, the UNIA, and also established the Black Star Shipping Line with a view to transporting Africans from the Americas back to Africa. And he was often persecuted. It was he who in 1916, in a church in Kingston, Jamaica, said, and I still have this quote in my memory, "Look to Africa, where a black king shall be crowned, for the day of redemption is near." He said this in 1916 in a church in Kingston, Jamaica. And I believe in 1926 or so, Emperor Haile Selassie was crowned King of Ethiopia. So, at the opening ceremony, I said that the wheels of history has turned full circle to have the son of the late Marcus Mosiah Garvey in our midst during the 11th edition of the International Roots Festival. Dr. Garvey, the son of the great father of the Pan-African movement, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, was born in 1934 to Marcus and Amy Jacques, a lady Dr. Garvey once called a very intelligent woman in a New York Times interview in 1987. Dr. Garvey started school, Dr. Julius Garvey, started school in England, where his father had moved the family. He spent most of his childhood in Jamaica. However, before going to Canada, where he received his undergraduate and medical degrees from McGill University in Montreal, in 1962, Dr. Garvey came to the United States as a resident in surgery at Mount Sinai Medical Center. He later studied thoracic and cardiovascular surgery at the University of Maryland Hospital in Baltimore and returned to New York in 1970. Since then, he has held several appointments at hospitals in New York, including acting program director of cardiothoracic surgery at Long Island Jewish Medical Center. He has also taught at several universities in New York and continues as an associate professor of surgery at State University of New York at Stony Brook. In 1983, he entered private practice on Long Island in the United States. His decision to become a doctor had grown out of the ideals of his family. My father dedicated his life to the service of people, and the people that he chose were his own race. Dr. Garvey said, "It was a matter of which service I would choose. I think white America has to look at itself in the mirror very critically." Dr. Garvey once said, "All men are brothers. All men were created in the image of God. All men were created equal. They have to formulate foreign and domestic policy based on that, because that is the truth and it will survive." In many ways, Dr. Garvey continues along the path of black pride that his father blazed nearly 90 years ago. Marcus Garvey was a powerful orator who rallied hundreds of thousands of blacks across the country in his quest to reclaim Africa for Africans and build African economic power. Dr. Garvey believes that blacks have come a long way since his father founded the United Negro Improvement Association in 1914. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome on the panel Dr. Julius Garvey. With those introductory remarks, I will now like to, without further ado, invite our first speaker this morning on the theme, African Culture in the 21st Century, Prospects and Challenges. Please welcome Dr. Ronoko.
I've lectured in many parts of Africa, but I can honestly say I don't think I've ever been a part of a delegation that has received the welcome that we have had. It's been virtually overwhelming. And I cannot thank the people of Gambia, the organizers of this program, Sister Tina, all of the people who've been involved in making me feel like an honored guest. Now today, I'm going to try to cover about 3.5 million years of history in about 35 minutes. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it, but I've called on the ancestors to guide me through it. And I want to broaden the theme with respect. I want to make it a global perspective, because not only are we talking about Africa and Africans in Africa surviving in the 21st century, we are a global people. In fact, my perspective is going to be the same today as it would be if I was teaching a class here or structuring the educational system here. We are a global people. Our history begins in Africa, but we should never, ever, ever start our history with slavery. We should not be defined by slavery. And I know that the people who say these things mean it, they have the best of intentions in the world. But I am not a descendant of slaves. I am a descendant of the first people to populate the planet Earth. The first people to give civilization and humanity to the world. As Brother Muta Baruka says, our African history is not slavery. Slavery interrupted African history. And that is the perspective that I want to bring to you today. Now, I'm a historian. My bio is a little different than we've been given. I'm a historian and an anthropologist, and I look at the global African community, and I try to do it visually. Now, people will say, why is history important? I think Malcolm X said it best when he said that of all our studies, it is history that is most qualified to reward our research. But nevertheless, all the time, people come to me, particularly young people, and they say, all that black stuff is good. All that history is good. How does that put money in my pocket? How does that feed my family? And what I say is this: what you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself. And what you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself. And what you know of yourself depends on what you have been told. So if you are told that your history starts with slavery, if you are told that your history starts with colonization, if you are told that you waited in a dark room for a white man to come into the room and switch on the light and bring you civilization, you're lost. Marcus Garvey used to say, if you have no confidence, you are defeated before you even start. And in order to have confidence, you have to have the sense that you've done something, that you've contributed to the world, that you have not been a hapless victim, that you have done more than suffer for thousands of years. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. But not only am I going to talk about it, I'm going to show you pictures. So I'm going to ask we're going to ask if we can turn off the lights and direct your attention to the brother on the wall and forget about me. You can listen to me, but I want you to see the images with the maxim that seeing is believing. I've already taken up about a third of my presentation with the introduction, so we better strap on our seatbelts and roll with it. We want to turn off as many lights as possible. Y'all don't mind sitting in the dark, do you? Most of us are in the dark all of our lives anyway. So an extra 30 minutes shouldn't hurt us. Please.
I'll put up the lights.
Turn off the lights. Now, history, why it's important. Look at this brother here. And again, I'm not just going to talk about history in the motherland or in the Gambia or the United States or the UK or Canada. I'm going to give you a global approach, and we'll see how it works. Now, this is the brother I went to high school with. His name is Tookie Williams. Tookie Williams is what we might call notorious. He was a founder of the organization, I won't call it a gang, called the Crips. And I'm sure you've even heard of the Crips in Africa. I grew up in what we now call South Central LA, a tough neighborhood. I did not grow up in a privileged position. My life was hard. And Tookie was a part of that experience. We went to high school together, and this brother was accused of doing some terrible things. He was executed a few years ago in California, the Golden State. And Tookie, before he died, with two other brothers, edited a book. After 30 years of being apart, after we left high school, I got a letter from a European woman who said that her friend was in prison on death row in California, San Quentin prison, and he had written a book on African children and African history, and he needed help publishing the book. I said, well, let me see it. The book was a mess, but he was on death row. And so I said, well, I'll edit the book. And Tookie and I developed a different relationship. And he recalled those times in high school, I helped you recall, when he tried to jack me up and take my lunch money. Okay? But by this time, he had evolved. He wrote a book on African history, African children. And this big, bad brother would sometimes call me from death row at 3 o'clock in the morning and cry like a baby. Not that he was afraid. I don't think he was afraid of anything, but he said, Ronoko, if only I had known then about my history, what I came to know. And that in many ways is the story of our people. Without knowledge of self, you are lost. As an African proverb says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. In order to know where you're going, you have to have a sense of where you've been. African people are told, forget about the past. How many times you heard, that was a long time ago? Aren't you people tired of talking about slavery? You're using it as a crutch. Let's get over it. But you could never tell a Jewish person that the Holocaust was a long time ago. They say never forget. Is the history of other people more significant than our own? All right, got that out of my system. Let's go to the next one. All right, here's one in Chicago. 2 black women, a young girl and her mother. I was told in Chicago, Sister Khadijah told me just yesterday on that long boat ride, which I enjoyed very much, by the way, that in Chicago every weekend 30 young Africans are killed by other young Africans. It seems to me that if those Africans understood that we came from royalty, their attitude would be vastly different. You don't aim a gun at somebody who you don't, you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. If we knew that this sister was a queen, not the B word, not the N word, we'd have a different perspective about ourselves. If we knew better, we would do better. Let's go to the next one. I better go quick. And here's the classic. Malcolm. Now, Malcolm's parents were Garveyites. And for me, Garvey is next to God. His parents were Garveyites. But Malcolm, at some point in time, became what we would today call a hood, a thug, a common criminal. He was incarcerated, came under the influence of Honorable Elijah Muhammad and others, and was transformed from Detroit Red to our black shining prince. That's the power of knowledge of self. Africa needs that knowledge of self. Our history should not begin with the colonial experience. It should not begin with slavery. Next. And these are some of the great historians who influenced me. Dr. John Henry Clark, with that nice red bow tie. Chancellor Williamson wrote the book, Destruction of Black Civilization, that attempts to address the question that I get more than any other, and that is, Ronoko, what happened to us? How do we lose it? How do we move from the pyramids to the projects? What happened to the point that most of us think we were never anything to begin with? And then the brother standing up is our living ancestor, Dr. Joseph Ben-Jochannan, and the light-skinned brother, John G. Jackson, who wrote the book that our moderator talked about, Introduction to African Civilization. You know, we do range in complexion from snow to crow and bright to night, but we black people are all the same. Next. One of my great friends and scholars, Dr. Asa G. Hilliard. Next. Shake hands to Joe. From maybe the greatest scholar we've ever produced, who took the African origins of Nile Valley civilization to a science. Next. And let's not leave the sisters out. We should not develop the same patriarchal attitudes that our oppressors have embedded in us. I love African women. I adore African women. I revere African women. I go out of my way to lift them up and recognize them. And this is one of our greatest historians. This is Miss Drusilla Dungy Houston, who wrote a book called The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire. Go, next, hit it. J.A. Rogers from Jamaica. When I heard that Rogers had traveled to 60 countries, I said, I'm gonna go to 65. I'm at 103 and counting now. And I like to think that I have a lot of juice in the tank. I may not look like it, but I'm running on full. And I like to think that Rogers is saying, Ronoko, go ahead, brother. I got your back. Because we should build on the successes of previous generations. We should not start all over again. Next. This is Adias do Nascimento, the great African scholar from Brazil. Brazil has the largest concentration of Africans in the Western Hemisphere. Next. And you know, slavery was just abolished in Brazil in 1888. And then the activist, a people without knowledge of his past is like a tree without roots. That's very profound. One time Garvey was asked, Mr. Garvey, because he had a great vision, are you an African, are you a Jamaican? Garvey thought for a moment and said, I will not give up a continent for an island. He said, see the big picture. Please say, you're not an African because you were born in Africa. You are an African because Africa is born in you. I don't need anybody to tell me I know I'm an African. Garvey never came to Africa, but nobody loved Africa more than that African did. Next. And then, no, go back. You're too enthusiastic, brother. The one before. This is just a quick one of Brother Malcolm in 1959 giving an award to the great J. Rogers. Next. And this is Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, who also understood the importance of history. In terms of identity, he would say, just because a cat has babies in an oven, you don't call the babies biscuits. Just because you are born in a place does not determine your nationality. I see myself as an African in America. I don't mind if you call me an African American. I love to be called black, but I see myself as an African in America. I was born in America, but my heart and soul belongs to Africa. Next. And this just shows the geography of Africa, how big Africa is. A lot of us think Africa is a little bitty place. Africa is huge. You can put all of Europe in it, United States 3 or 4 times, China, who we need to look out for, India, and still have space. Next. And this is what the Europeans did. This is what we allowed the Europeans to do. Look at what they stole. If I give white people credit for anything, it's stealing. They are masters at that. They stole us, and they stole our motherland. It's up to us to redeem it. Those Africans at home, and those Africans abroad. Next. And then the wealth of Africa, and the poverty of Africa. As Peter Tosh used to say, Africa is the richest place with the poorest race. Oh my, what a disgrace. Look at the material resources that Africa has. There's no reason this should be an impoverished continent. Africa is underdeveloped. It's been raped and robbed and pillaged. Next. Now let's look at the history itself. When I do presentations, I usually start by asking people, what do you think of when you think of Africa? Just give me your gut reaction. Wild animals, poverty, disease. But if I were to ask, what do you think of when you think of Canada? You wouldn't say that. What do you think of when you think of France? You wouldn't say that. What do you think of when you think of Australia? You wouldn't say that. But many of us have the most negative attitudes about Africa. We are told that. Those Africans don't want you. They think they're better than you. They sold you. And I said, where'd you get that from? I don't know, somebody told me. And we internalized that. So I began to break that down and say, Africa's where the first people came from. Africa's where people first stood on 2 feet. Africa's where people first built a house, not a hut. A house, a dwelling, a residence. Where they first sailed a boat. Where they first had science. Where they first had clothes. Where they first wore shoes. Where they first charted the stars in the heavens. Plotted the circumference of the earth. Had philosophy and morality and religion. Why should I be ashamed to be an African? Some of us are so ashamed to be an African, I've even heard people say, thank God for slavery. Because at least it got us out of Africa. You wouldn't hear a Jewish person say, thank Jehovah for the Holocaust because they got us out of Germany. I want us to look at history in a new light and use history as a foundation for what we must do. This is an African scientist with the bones of Dignesh, Lucy, 3.4 million years old, gold. And then we have, next slide, my brother. Now you're not enthusiastic at all. The problem I had when I was in high school is what we call math anxiety. I couldn't handle mathematics. And then I found out that Africans invented mathematics. This is called the Ishango bone from the Congo. It's 25,000 years old. A mathematical counting stick. Next. And we have our great heroes from the past, like Imhotep, before Leonardo da Vinci, before Michelangelo, before Einstein, before any of them, Africans were preeminent. This is the first scientist in the world. He came, his name is Imhotep. And he comes from a country we now call Egypt. Egypt is in Africa. It has always been in Africa. I've been to Egypt 22 times. It has been in Africa every time. I'm pretty confident about that. Next. And this is what Imhotep designed. You know, Africans designed the world's first large stone building. Next. That gave way to these. How do we fall from the pyramids to the projects? What do we do? We're not a stupid people.
Brilliant people.
Brilliant people. What did we do? I think sometimes we love people who didn't love us back. And a lot of us still love people who don't love us back. Next. Even a black Christ? I give the Rastas much credit. Not only did they keep the memory of Garvey alive when other people denigrated Garvey, they dared say that God was a black man. They dared say that God is in us. They dared say that when you look in a mirror, you see a reflection of God looking right back at you. I think it was Garvey who said, anyway, when I look in a mirror, I want to feel like God is looking right back at me. People will say, but it doesn't matter. It's a spirit. My attitude is, if it doesn't matter, why is he painted white almost all of the time? Our perception of the color of God is profound. Next. And then we can go back to Asar, Osiris, next. And the depiction of Amen. So when you say amen, you're calling on this aspect of God. Painted black. Can you imagine God being black? If you can just get over that hump, that's a big part of the battle right there. I know a lot of people, black Christians, if you said God was black, they would leave the church. Because we've been so ingrained with white supremacy. Next. These are just some of the kings and queens of the motherland of Kemet, a man named Aha Mena. Next. We'll just go through these quickly, brother. Go. Go. Hit it. Queen Ty. That's what Africans in the Valley of Now look like. They did not look like Elizabeth Taylor. Next. Akhenaten. Next. Ramses the Great. Next. King Tut, a boy king, who if he lived in Southside Chicago today would be in trouble. Next. Taharka, go. And then, not just in Africa, Mansa Musa, who is the wealthiest man that ever lived. And part of the Gambia, I think, was part of the Mali Empire. Next. Go. Hit it. From Nigeria. Nigerians like to tell me, if you haven't been to Nigeria, you haven't been to Africa. So recently I made plans to go to Nigeria 3 times. Next. And then Great Zimbabwe from Southern Africa. Next. And the plunder of Africa. Now this is the European contribution to Africa. Next. And the enslavement, not just by Europeans, but by Arabs as well. Let's not leave them out, because they softened Africa up for the Europeans. This is a slave quarters called Kebele in southern Tunisia. Next. And I don't know if this is Cape Coast or Elmina in Ghana. Next. Fort James. It's hard for me to call it Kunta Kinte Island. because I think that sanitizes it. I know it's well-intentioned, but I think the brutal realities of it need to be kept in the forefront of our minds. Next. And the last bath, a place called Slave River in Ghana, where the Africans were able to take a last bath, still in their chains, before they were taken to the dungeons. Next. And in Senegal, there was a dungeon for children. That's hard to imagine, isn't it? A dungeon for the women, a dungeon for the men, and a dungeon for the babies. I think on that. I'm a man. I've been branded and beaten, and I'm in a dark, hot hole, not knowing what's going to happen to me, but knowing it's not going to be a good thing. And my wife, or my mother, and my sister, my daughter, my grandmother's in the women's dungeon. And we can imagine the horrors that was inflicted on those sisters. And then in the background, I hear my daughter, I have an 8-year-old, and I hear her saying, "Daddy, I'm scared, Daddy. Help me. I'm cold, Daddy. I'm hungry, Daddy." And you are unable to intervene. Imagine the psychological damage that we still suffer from today. And I wonder if that's not at the root of our problems with relationships. I could write a book on relationships, how to screw them up. Next. And then, there you go. That was the voyage. And as Muta said, they didn't have visas or passports. Next. 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 But I don't want to talk about those Africans who suffered only. I want to talk about those Africans who resisted. Malcolm X used to say, "Cotton picking don't move me." I'm tired of hearing of Africans as helpless, hapless victims. I want to hear about those Africans who fought in the face of overwhelming odds to maintain their basic human dignity. That I can take inspiration from. Next. And that's in Zinga, by the way. And Menelik of Ethiopia. We had our victories. In 1896, he led an African army that routed a highly mechanized European army at the Battle of Adwa. Next. And then the beauty of Africa. If you've been to Mosul Tunya, you never forget it. Next. And the rivers of Africa, the Nile. Next. And the Niger. Next. And the Congo. Next. And the Sahara. Africa is a beautiful place. Malcolm X used to say, if Africa wasn't beautiful, the white man wouldn't want it. He wouldn't have to fight to put him out. And this isn't about hating on white people. I'm indifferent to white people. This is about loving yourself. If you don't love yourself, how can you love anybody else? History gives you that dose of self-love like nothing else. Next. Let's go around the world real quick. Next. Africans in Asia. This is what the first people who left Africa went into Asia looked like. Next. Africans who helped bring civilization to Asia. Go. An African in Judea in the 8th century. Next. This is the tomb of Bilal, the great African Muslim in Damascus. Next. Antar, a black man or man with an African mother and an Arab father, who became the father of chivalry, a dashing knight and poet, before Richard the Lionheart. Next. These are black people in Asia today. From Kuwait, go. Oman, next. Israel, go. Myself, the very handsome anthropologist on the top, and these African women in Turkey, next. Oman, next. Yemen, go. The Persian Gulf, next. Saudi Arabia, next one. A brother, I started to say in Kingston, but no, this is a brother in southern Iraq. I know that's probably not funny, that was a terrible thing to say. Next. Oman, go. Palestine, next. South Asia, this is a sister from the Andaman Islands with natural blonde hair. Next. These are the black people, go, in India, which has, keep going brother, the largest concentration of black folk in any one country in the world. Just roll through it. Next. They all look like people straight out of the hood. That's me. Next. From the Punjab. Next. These are the untouchables, the Dalits. Next. Go. Next one. Next. Next. I like to be around little people. It gives me a sense of self-esteem. Next. Look. Next one. She looks like she could be from Somalia. Next. Looks just like my mother except for the earrings. Next. Next. At the time, the blackest human being I had ever seen in my life. Next. Go. Now that's black. That's black! And I'm so envious. When I use the word fair skin, I'm not talking about European features. When I use the word good hair, I'm defining it from my perspective. A brother says that the essence of power is the ability to find someone's reality and make them live according to that definition as though they chose that definition. But other people have defined for us what it means to be beautiful. So we have a head full of hair that don't belong to us. And some of us bleach our skins because we say, I don't want to look white, I just want to look nice. So our definitions of beauty are given to us by the same people who oppress us. Hotep, my brother. Next. Go. Next one. Go. And that's an untouchable. This is how the Dalits of India are treated today. Next one. Here I am in India in 1999 being welcomed, and the brother who welcomed me gave a speech on the life and times of Malcolm X. Next. A symposium with the Dravidians and black movement. Next. And hanging out in India with the Kerala Dalit Panthers, who named themselves after the Black Panther Party in South India. Next. So we're talking about a global approach. Nepal, go. Pakistan, a Facebook friend of mine in Pakistan. Next. Pakistan. Pakistan. Go. He looks like Oprah Winfrey in Sri Lanka. Next. Keep going. This is Southeast Asia. Cambodia. Hit it. Look. Next one. Look at those sisters. Next. Ancient Cambodia. My brother. He looks like Muta Maruka. Next. This was the cover of my first French language book. Next. And these are images of the Buddha from Thailand. Next. Vietnam. Go. Thailand. Hit it. Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Vietnam. And these are the people there today. A brother from Vietnam. Next. And a sister from Cambodia. Next. And a sister with a nice fro. I used to have one like that a long time ago. From Malaysia. Next. Philippines. Go. Philippines. 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 And the Philippines. Next. Go. China. Next. Next. From China. That's 1,500 years old. A brother in the Tang Dynasty in China giving the Black Power salute. I like to think so anyway. Next. Kublai, this is the bodyguard of Kublai Khan. Next. From the Yuan Dynasty in China. Go. Bodhidharma, who brought martial arts to the Far East. Next. Fudomayo, you know there's a Japanese proverb that says, for a samurai to be brave, he must have a bit of black blood. Next. China, next. Down under, Australia. Do you know there was a branch of the Garvey movement in Australia? Garvey was so powerful, there were 3 chapters of the UNIA and ACL in Australia in the 1920s. Garvey had planned to go to Australia to be with these sisters and brothers. These are the people called Aborigines or Aboriginals. Next. Rastafari. Next. Here I am with 2 of the founding members of the Aboriginal Australian Black Panther Party. And I like that picture. I like to have that plate of fruit up there. I try to give the impression of being health conscious anyway. Now, up to that point, they were considered plants and animals, flora and fauna. That's a literal fact. Go. Next. This is Truganini. This is the last of the full-blood Tasmanians. Next one. Go. Go. Indonesia, next. She looks like Beyonce with clothes on. This sister's from Vanuatu. Let's go to the next one. I'm running out of time. I'm almost finished. I have a long way to go, but I'm going to finish. Who looks like Theodore Pendergrass in New Guinea, next. Solomon Islands, next. Look at these natural blondes. Black people were the first blondes. Next. I'm not saying go get blonde hair, but we were the first. Next. Here's a young brother I photographed on Buka Island in New Guinea with a 50-cent t-shirt on. I wish he had a t-shirt with Sizzler on there. A t-shirt with Muta on there. Not no sense. Next. A brother from Fiji. Next. A sister in Fiji that I fell in love with didn't know. I can fall in love in a couple of minutes, so watch out when you come up to me, sisters. But this sister had a special reason. This is in Fiji. She's a tour guide. She lives in a village where they say they first landed when they came from Africa thousands of years ago. I was with a group of Europeans that day. It just kind of turned out that way. And we get to the village, and they were nasty, rude. And I said, oh, okay, I don't want to be around you either. I know how to get an attitude. So this sister looked at everybody up and down and says, you know, we come from Africa. We're an African people. This is deep in the Pacific, and we speak an African language. And then she paused for effect and says, and you know, we used to eat a lot of white people. But we had to stop because the meat was bad and it made us throw up and vomit. I knew that was a woman for me. But I'm sure she was just joking. But those Europeans turned red. I said, sister, I'm hard of hearing. Can you say that just one more time? Help me. But she was married. Next. Go. I'm going to finish up with more blondes. Next. Again. Next. Look. Next. Look at the little brother on the end making the face for the camera. I took that picture. Next. And this mean looking little boy. Next. He looks like Miles Davis in the South Pacific. Next. Solomon Islands. Go. And you see the mean-looking kid on the end over there? I wanted to walk up to that little boy and say, do you need a hug? But I was afraid he might hit me, pull out a gap. Next. Fiji. Next one. My brother, Benny Winda, who is going to be head of state of West Papua if the Indonesians don't kill him, who looks a lot like, next, LeBron James. Go. Who looks like Dizzy Gillespie in the South Pacific. Next. Who looks like Bill Cosby in the South Pacific. Go. Sisters from Palau in Micronesia. Next. Sister from Chuuk in Micronesia. Go. New Zealand. Whanganui Maori. Hawaii. King of Hawaii. King of Hawaii. And I'm going to end here. I have a lot more to show, but I don't want to abuse my time. My hosts have been so generous with me, and I know we want to hear Dr. Garvey, but this is what scientists say the first people in Europe look like. And you can figure out the scientists, and you can figure out who they say the first person in Europe looked like. Now Africans are dying to leave Africa. But there was a time when Africans were the first people in Europe, when they brought civilization to Europe. They didn't have visas. They were not refugees. They were not running from Africa. They brought civilization to Europe. They brought civilization to the world. And this is the kind of mentality that I want us to have. That we have a history that is second to none. Garvey perhaps said it best. Lift your heads, black people. African people, be proud of who you are. Be proud of your fathers. Be proud of your mothers. In the past, we created a marvelous civilization. And we shall in the future, with God's grace, create another that will astonish the world. God bless you. Thank you so much.